Mara had never imagined that her 30s would look like this. A cardboard box balanced on one hip, a child's backpack dangling from the other hand, and the echo of her own footsteps bouncing off the dim hallway of an apartment building that smelled faintly of old paint and boiled cabbage. The divorce papers had been signed a year ago, but the finality of it all only struck when the landlord of her old townhouse handed her the deposit check with a clipped, "Good luck." Good luck. As if luck had much to do with anything anymore. Her son, Oliver, trailed behind her carrying a shoebox full of action figures. His sneakers scuffed against the floor, making a dragging sound that felt heavier than the box she carried. He was only 8, too young to understand the intricacies of broken promises and financial settlements, but old enough to know that Dad was gone and life was smaller now. The apartment they were moving into was cheap. That was its main virtue. The walls were a tired beige, the carpet threadbare, and the kitchen no bigger than a closet. But rent was rent, and this place at least wouldn't demand more than she could offer. "Can I have the room with the window?" Oliver asked as soon as they pushed open the squeaky door. "Of course," Mara said, setting the box down with a grunt. The room with the window was little more than a square with peeling wallpaper, but Oliver's eyes brightened as if it were a castle. Children had that ability, to see possibility where adults only saw limitation. They spent the rest of the afternoon arranging the essentials: mattress on the floor, a second-hand dresser, mismatched plates in the cupboard. By evening, Oliver had claimed his corner, lining his action figures along the sill of the window, looking out over the narrow street. Mara collapsed onto the mattress in her own room, staring at the ceiling. A crack ran across it like a scar. She told herself it was temporary. This was just a step, a pause, a place to breathe before she figured out what came next. She repeated the words like a prayer. The weeks that followed were heavy with routine. Mara worked part-time at a bakery, waking before dawn to frost cupcakes and knead dough, then rushing back to drop Oliver at school. The bakery paycheck barely stretched, but it kept them afloat. Evenings were quiet. Oliver did his homework at the kitchen table, while Mara tried to stretch meals with creativity. Rice with canned beans, pasta with whatever vegetables were on discount. Sometimes, when Oliver was asleep, she sat by the window and stared at the neighboring building, wondering if anyone else there carried the same exhaustion in their bones. It was during one of these long nights that she first noticed the strange bulge in the wall of her bedroom. At first, she thought it was just poorly done plastering, the kind of shoddy repair you expect in low-rent apartments. But as the weeks went by, the bulge nagged at her. When the moonlight slipped through the blinds, the uneven surface cast odd shadows, almost like the outline of a box buried within the wall. Curiosity is a persistent creature. One Saturday morning, when Oliver was at a friend's birthday party, Mara stood in front of the wall with a screwdriver in hand. She told herself she was being ridiculous, but her pulse quickened as she chipped away at the flaking paint. The plaster cracked more easily than she expected. Behind it, she felt the resistance of wood. Her breath caught. She scraped further, revealing the faint edge of what looked like a panel. It was old, the wood discolored, the nails rusted. A hidden compartment. For a moment she hesitated, the rational part of her brain whispering warnings. "This is nothing. Don't make trouble with the landlord. You don't have time for this." But another voice, quieter, deeper, urged her on. It took nearly an hour of careful prying before the panel gave way. Dust clouded the air, making her cough. And there, wedged tightly in the cavity, was a small metal box, about the size of a shoebox. Its surface was tarnished, the corners dented, but the lock had long since rusted away. Mara's hands trembled as she pulled it free. She carried it to the mattress and sat cross-legged, staring at it. She had expected maybe a bundle of wires, or nothing at all. But this was deliberate. Someone had hidden this box here. Someone who had lived in this apartment long before her. She hesitated only a second before lifting the lid. Inside lay a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon, a black and white photograph of a woman with tired eyes, and a small silver locket. Beneath them, folded neatly, was a journal bound in cracked leather. The air seemed to still. Mara touched the photograph first. The woman stared back at her with an expression both stern and gentle, the kind of face that had weathered storms without collapsing. She turned it over. On the back, in careful cursive, was written, Eleanor and Anna, 1964. Her gaze shifted to the letters. She untied the ribbon, and the paper crackled in her hands. The handwriting was neat but hurried, the kind of writing that comes from nights spent at the kitchen table after children are asleep. The first letter began, Dear Anna, I don't know if these words will ever reach you, but I need to write them. The world feels smaller each day, and I fear I will disappear if I don't leave something behind. Mara's throat tightened. She read on, the words blurring with emotion. Eleanor, it seemed, had been a mother, divorced, alone, struggling in the very same apartment decades earlier. The letters spoke of rationing food, of neighbors who judged, of nights spent wondering if she was enough for her child. Every line felt like an echo of Mara's own life. She set the letter down and opened the locket. Inside was a tiny picture of a little girl, Anna, presumably. The image was grainy, but the child's smile shone clear. Finally, Mara picked up the journal. Its leather cover was worn soft, its pages yellowed. She flipped through quickly at first, catching glimpses of sketches of grocery budgets, recipes scribbled in margins, little notes like, Anna laughed today when I burned the toast, or, we survived the winter somehow. It was not a treasure in the traditional sense. No gold, no secret fortune. But as Mara read, something inside her shifted. This was a record of survival, a roadmap of resilience. A woman long gone had poured her fears and hopes into these pages, and now, decades later, Mara had found them. When Oliver returned that afternoon, sticky with frosting from the birthday cake, Mara was still sitting on the mattress with the letters spread around her. What's that? He asked, climbing up beside her. A story, Mara said softly. A story about another mom and her daughter who lived here once. Oliver picked up the locket and turned it in his hands. Is it like treasure? Mara smiled faintly. Yes, she whispered. The best kind. That night, after Oliver had gone to bed, Mara returned to the journal. She read late into the hours, the words of a woman from another time seeping into her. Eleanor wrote about small victories, finding work at a seamstress shop, trading recipes with neighbors, mending clothes until they lasted twice their years. She wrote about loneliness, about watching other families walk together on Sundays, about tears shed quietly so her daughter would not hear. But she also wrote about perseverance, about how survival wasn't about grand gestures, but about tiny decisions stacked one upon another, like bricks forming a wall strong enough to keep the storms at bay. Mara closed the journal and pressed it to her chest. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel entirely alone. Mara woke earlier than usual the next morning, the journal still resting beside her pillow as if it had been whispering to her in her sleep. She rubbed her eyes, half expecting the box and its contents to have vanished overnight like a dream. But they were there, spread carefully across the mattress. The letters, the photograph, the silver locket, and Eleanor's journal, waiting patiently to be read again. Oliver was still asleep, his hair a tousled halo on the pillow. For a moment, Mara watched him breathe, the slow rhythm anchoring her. Then, quietly, she returned to the journal. The next entry she turned to was dated January 3rd, 1965. The radiator broke again. The landlord says he'll fix it, but I know better. Anna and I slept in our coats. She whispered that it felt like camping. I wanted to cry, but I laughed with her. Children deserve laughter even in the cold. Mara's chest tightened. Only last week their own heater had sputtered, leaving the apartment icy. She had wrapped Oliver in blankets, pretending it was an adventure. The parallel was uncanny. Another entry. They say a divorced woman should be grateful for scraps. I say we make our own table, even if it's made of splinters. The words struck her like flint against stone. Mara had heard the same whispers from neighbors, the same sideways glances at the bakery when she mentioned being a single mother. She closed her eyes. Eleanor's voice, captured on paper decades ago, felt alive, as if the woman were sitting beside her, offering not pity, but solidarity. That week, Mara carried the journal with her everywhere. On the bus to the bakery, she flipped pages. During Oliver's soccer practice, she perched on the bleachers reading lines under the dim field lights. One passage described how Eleanor stretched groceries. A pot of beans becomes 3 meals if you mash them, spice them, and call them new. Anna doesn't complain. She just asks if I can make the bread smell like home. Inspired, Mara began experimenting. She mashed beans into patties, added herbs, turned leftovers into soups. Oliver noticed. "This tastes better than last time," he said one evening, spooning up a bean stew. "Did you learn it online?" "Something like that," Mara replied, smiling to herself. Another entry detailed how Eleanor mended old clothes with patches cut from discarded fabric. Mara remembered the box of torn jeans in her closet. That weekend, she borrowed a sewing kit from a neighbor and sat cross-legged on the floor, stitching. Her fingers clumsy at first, but soon steady. Oliver watched from the couch. "Are you making new pants?" "No," she said, "just giving the old ones another chance." He grinned. "Like us." The words pierced her, tender and sharp. She reached over to ruffle his hair, swallowing the sudden lump in her throat. Yet resilience did not erase hardship. The bakery cut her hours without warning, citing slow business. The paycheck shrank, and Mara felt the old panic rise: how to pay rent, buy groceries, keep Oliver clothed. That night she opened the journal again, desperate for comfort. Her hands shook as she found a page smudged with what looked like water stains. "Lost my job today. They said a married man needed it more. I wanted to scream, but Anna was watching, so I told her we'd find another way. Always another way." Mara exhaled shakily. Eleanor had faced the same cliff edge, yet she had endured. The entry continued. "I took in sewing from neighbors. Small coins, but coins all the same. Survival is a puzzle. You use every odd piece until it fits." The next day, Mara placed a flyer on the building's notice board. "Odd jobs available. Cleaning, mending, errands. Ask for Mara in 2B. At first, there was silence. Then Mrs. Rodriguez from 3C knocked on her door, asking if Mara could hem curtains. Later, an elderly man on the ground floor requested help carrying groceries. The jobs paid little, but the trickle of cash eased the sharpest edges of worry. Each time she worked, Mara thought of Eleanor, stitching at her own kitchen table decades ago. Two women separated by time, bound by necessity. The journal also spoke of loneliness. One entry, dated April 1965, read, "Sometimes I stand at the window and watch families walk by. Couples with hands entwined, children with two shadows stretching beside them. I tell myself one shadow is enough, but the nights are long." Mara closed the book, her eyes stinging. She, too, knew the ache of watching couples in the park, of overhearing colleagues joke about date nights, of feeling invisible at gatherings where every other chair was filled. One Saturday, while Oliver was at a sleepover, Mara felt the emptiness acutely. The apartment seemed too quiet, the silence pressing against her. Out of habit, she reached for the journal. "Loneliness can drown a woman if she lets it," Eleanor had written. "So I fill the silence with purpose. I bake, I write, I sing badly while scrubbing floors. I remind myself that Anna is watching. If I crumble, so will she." Mara set the book down and forced herself up. She scrubbed the kitchen until it shone, humming tunelessly. When Oliver returned the next day, he exclaimed, "It smells like cookies." She laughed. "Just soap, but maybe we'll bake next time." As weeks turned to months, the journal became a guidebook. Mara adopted small rituals from Eleanor's notes, keeping a jar of coins for emergencies, writing gratitude lists even on bad days, teaching Oliver practical skills like folding laundry and boiling pasta. One evening, she read aloud a passage to Oliver. "Anna asked me if I missed her father. I told her missing is a weight we carry, but it doesn't have to break us. We learn to balance it." Oliver listened intently. Then he asked, "Do you miss Dad?" Mara hesitated, then repeated Eleanor's words almost exactly. "It's a weight, yes, but we're learning to balance it." Oliver nodded, as if the answer settled something inside him. But not all lessons were easy. Winter arrived with biting cold. Their heater faltered again, and the landlord ignored her calls. Mara piled blankets on Oliver, recalling Eleanor's entry about sleeping in coats. She tried to laugh with him, but fear gnawed at her. What if the cold made him sick? She dug through the journal until she found advice. "When the cold crept in, I boiled water and poured it into jars, wrapping them in cloth to keep Anna's bed warm." Not perfect, but warmth enough. That night, Mara filled old glass jars with hot water, wrapping them in towels, placing them at the foot of Oliver's bed. He giggled at the toe heaters, wiggling under the covers. The sight eased her heart. She whispered a thank you into the dark, unsure if it was to Eleanor, fate, or simply the act of endurance itself. The discovery of the box had begun as curiosity, but it was becoming something more, a lifeline. Each page of the journal was a mirror, reflecting Mara's struggles. And each reflection offered not despair, but possibility. Still, questions lingered. Who had Eleanor truly been? What became of Anna? Did they ever escape the cycle of hardship? Mara resolved to find out. She visited the local library on her rare day off, sifting through old records. There were mentions of a seamstress named Eleanor Wright in the 1960s, listed at the same apartment address. A later record noted that she had joined a community group advocating for women's rights. But there was little about Anna. Mara's heart ached at the absence. She wanted to know if the little girl with the bright smile had grown safe, if Eleanor's sacrifices had borne fruit. The search became a quiet obsession. Each night, after Oliver slept, Mara scoured online archives, old census records, newspaper snippets. The answers remained elusive, but the pursuit itself felt meaningful, as if honoring Eleanor's memory by refusing to let her vanish into silence. One evening, as Mara sat surrounded by papers, Oliver wandered in, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, why are you always reading that old book?" he asked. Mara pulled him close. "Because it reminds me that we're not the first to struggle, and if Eleanor could keep going, so can we." Oliver rested his head against her shoulder. "Then maybe someday someone will read about us and feel the same." Mara kissed his hair. "Maybe they will." In that moment, the weight of loneliness eased. She realized she was not only surviving, she was weaving herself into a larger tapestry, one that connected her to women across time who had endured, who had found ways to laugh in the cold and to patch torn lives into something whole again. And for the first time in years, Mara felt not just like a divorced mom scraping by, but like the keeper of a legacy, one that had begun with a hidden box in the wall and was now alive in her own hands. Spring arrived in fits and starts, teasing the city with bursts of warmth, only to retreat again into chill winds. Mara had grown accustomed to living with small uncertainties, unexpected bills, last-minute bakery shifts, Oliver's sudden growth spurts that left jeans an inch too short. Yet through it all, the journal remained a steady companion, a quiet mentor, whispering resilience. But the unanswered question gnawed at her. What had become of Eleanor and Anna? One Saturday morning, Mara took Oliver with her to the library's local history room. Dust floated in golden beams of sunlight, and the air smelled of paper and patience. Oliver busied himself with a stack of old maps, while Mara sifted through microfilm reels of newspapers from the late 1960s. Hours passed with little more than blurry headlines until a small article caught her eye. Community Sewing Project aids struggling families, led by local mother. The accompanying photo was grainy, but Mara recognized the stern, tired eyes from the photograph in the box. Eleanor. Her heart thudded. The article described how Eleanor had organized women in the neighborhood to teach sewing skills, providing both income and solidarity. It was dated 1968. Mara copied down the details, hungry for more. A few reels later, she found another mention. Eleanor had spoken at a town meeting about housing rights, advocating for repairs to run-down apartments. The landlord had ignored her pleas, but she had persisted. No mention of Anna. That night, back at the apartment, Mara sat with Oliver at the kitchen table. "I think Eleanor tried to change things," she told him. "She didn't just survive, she helped others survive too." Oliver's eyes widened. "Like a superhero?" Mara chuckled. "A very practical one, with a needle and thread instead of a cape." The search deepened. Mara wrote to the Historical Society, asking about records of community groups from the 1960s. Weeks later, a letter arrived. They had found an obituary for an Eleanor Wright, dated 1989. She had passed away at the age of 64, remembered as a seamstress and community advocate. Survived by her daughter, Anna. Mara traced the lines with her finger, relief mingling with sadness. Eleanor had lived, endured, and left behind a daughter. But where was Anna now? The obituary mentioned that Anna had moved out of state. No further detail. Mara's curiosity flared into determination. Perhaps it was foolish, but she felt indebted to Eleanor. This woman's words had carried her through the hardest months of her life. She longed to tell Anna that her mother's legacy still breathed. Weeks later, Mara's chance arrived unexpectedly. At the bakery, a customer struck up casual conversation while waiting for her order. She mentioned she was visiting from Ohio, researching her family roots. Something about her tone made Mara bold. "Do you know anyone by the name of Anna Wright?" she asked hesitantly. The woman tilted her head. Actually, yes, my Aunt Anna married into my family. She lives in Ohio now, near Dayton. Mara's breath caught. Do you know how I could reach her? The woman scribbled down an address on a napkin. She doesn't use email much, but she loves letters. Mara stared at the napkin as if it were a treasure map. That night, after Oliver fell asleep, Mara sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor's journal open beside her. She began to write, Dear Anna, you don't know me, but I feel as if I know a part of you. I live in the apartment where you and your mother once lived. Recently, I discovered a box hidden in the wall. Inside were her letters, her photograph, and her journal. I have been reading them, and they have been my lifeline. I wanted you to know that your mother's words are still alive, still guiding another mother and child through hard times. She poured out her story, her divorce, her struggles, Oliver's laughter, the way Eleanor's advice had become a lantern in the dark. By the time she signed her name, tears dotted the page. She mailed the letter the next morning, heart pounding as if she'd sent a piece of her soul across the miles. Weeks passed with no reply. Mara tried not to hope too much, yet every day she checked the mailbox. Life continued. Oliver's school projects, her odd jobs, the endless balancing act of bills. Still, the silence stretched. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low, she found an envelope waiting. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate. She tore it open with trembling hands. Dear Mara, your letter stunned me. I had forgotten about that apartment, those walls that seemed to close in on us. But I remember the box. My mother hid it there when I was a girl. She told me that if anyone ever found it, it meant they were meant to read her words. Mara's vision blurred. I cannot tell you how much comfort it brings to know her journal still matters. My mother was strong, but she always feared she'd be forgotten. To hear that you and your son have found courage in her pages, it feels like she is alive again. Thank you for writing to me. The letter was signed simply, Anna. Mara pressed the paper to her chest, overwhelmed. From that day forward, Mara and Anna exchanged letters. They shared memories, recipes, reflections. Anna sent photos of her grandchildren, explaining how much her mother had shaped her life. Mara sent pictures of Oliver, stories of how the journal had guided her. It was as if two timelines, once parallel, had finally converged. Oliver grew fascinated with the correspondence. So the little girl in the locket is a grandma now? He asked. Yes, Mara smiled. And we're part of her story now, too. As the months rolled on, Mara found herself changed. She no longer viewed herself as merely scraping by. She began baking extra loaves at the bakery, selling them from a small table at the weekend market. Inspired by Eleanor's community efforts, she organized a skills swap in the apartment building. Neighbors teaching each other sewing, cooking, budgeting. The hall buzzed with laughter and shared resilience. One evening, Mrs. Rodriguez clasped Mara's hands. You've brought life back to this place, she said warmly. Mara thought of Eleanor and whispered inwardly. No, she did. I'm just carrying it on. The final piece of the puzzle arrived in a small package one autumn afternoon. Inside was a framed photograph, Eleanor holding a young Anna, both smiling shyly at the camera. Alongside it was a note from Anna. I want you and Oliver to have this. My mother would have wanted it to live where her words still matter. Consider it part of the box you discovered. Treasure it, as I have. Mara placed the photograph on the shelf above the kitchen table, beside the journal encased in protective plastic. It became their household altar, not to wealth or grandeur, but to survival, resilience, and the invisible threads connecting women across generations. On Oliver's 9th birthday, they celebrated with a cake Mara had baked herself. Friends from the building crowded the tiny apartment, laughter spilling into the hallway. Oliver blew out his candles with a grin, cheeks flushed. Afterward, as the guests drifted away, he climbed onto Mara's lap. Mom, do you think Eleanor can see us? Mara kissed the top of his head. I think she'd be proud of us. Oliver considered this. Then maybe when I grow up, I'll write things down too, so someone else won't feel alone. Her heart swelled. That's the best gift you could ever give. Years later, Mara would look back on that spring as the turning point. Not when money suddenly appeared, not when life became easy, but when she realized she was part of something larger, a chain of resilience stretching through time. The hidden box had not held gold or jewels. Its treasure was far rarer, proof that survival itself is an inheritance, passed down like a secret language. Eleanor had spoken it to Anna. Anna had carried it forward. And now, Mara and Oliver were fluent too. Standing by the window one evening, the city lights flickering outside, Mara whispered into the night, "Thank you, Eleanor. We'll keep your story alive." And for the first time, the walls around her no longer felt confining. They felt like shelter, woven with memory, strengthened by voices that refused to fade.